On today's episode, we're talking about business coaching, leadership development, and so much more. Come join us on our next step on the perfect route. Welcome to today's episode. I've got a great guest lined up who's going to be talking with me about leadership development and corporate learning and development in general. Hello.
Hello, Bill. Thanks so much for having me today.
You're welcome. Could you introduce yourself and tell the folks a little bit about you?
Sure thing. I'm Aleta Maxwell. I'm an executive coach and learning and development expert. I have had the amazing opportunity to, prior to this role, be the Chief Human Resource Officer for a restaurant group here in New York City. I helped them grow from 3 locations to 22 locations prior to us selling the company and allowing me to pivot into executive coaching.
Fantastic. What a great set of experiences you've got.
Yeah, I had some amazing opportunities in my career.
Well, that's going to be awesome to hear about as we work through our questions today. We've already had a great conversation getting ready for today, and I'm curious if you'd share your origin story with us. What drew you into the world of leadership development?
Yeah, so it was really early on in my life. I was a swimmer. I was a competitive swimmer, so I would spend 4 to 5 days in the pool. And I had a amazing coach who followed the principles of coaching from Phil Jackson. And I also was a diehard Bulls fan in the 90s. And I started to notice a difference in coaches. And that's where my leadership focus started on was with sports coaches, taking a look the difference between Phil Jackson and other coaches and how they were able to motivate and inspire their players. As I grew in my career, as I started working and growing in different fields, I really quickly identified with certain leadership capabilities and styles. The ones that worked for me might not have worked for others. And what were those differences? Why did people get inspired and motivated for certain leaders and not for others? What were the things that were the obstacles for those leaders? That all became a focus of mine really early in my career. I was very lucky to be tapped to start memorialize and building out training plans for companies early on. Crazy enough, when I was 17, a restaurant asked me to start building this for them. And so
Hmm.
throughout my career, the parallels between amazing leadership and training and development became really clear to me. As I was in my chief human resource officer role, I was really trusted to build out the culture of our company. And I started realizing that certain individuals just had not been developed in how to be a great leader, how to be mindful and intentional with how they showed up, with how they communicated, with how they created buy in within their team, and then how they motivated and inspired through their feedback. And I started realizing that certain people had natural gifts in this area, but other people could be developed in these areas if that we were intentional about it. And so that really started to up my level of interest. And that's why I pivoted into executive coaching to be able to help these leaders that were in leadership positions, but yet had not been developed in some of these areas.
That's amazing. We've got one similarity in our origin story. I was a track athlete in high school. I ran 1 and 2 mile runs, and I remember my coach. He had an interesting style, but he was all about leadership and putting ourselves out into the arena, so to speak, so that we could find our way and achieve more. Um, and you got a really early start in leadership development then.
I really did. I started really focusing on it when I was about 13. I got as many books from Phil Jackson, any article that he did, any interview, I really started focusing on and absorbing as much as possible because I loved his intentionality on leadership and his focus on being really the leader that each individual athlete needed. And I loved
Hmm.
bringing that into the corporate space. I think that there's so many parallels that we can draw between sports and the corporate world.
And the 90s Bulls were such a diverse cast of characters. It was always amazing to me that Phil Jackson could not only pull the team together, but get the best out of each athlete. not just the team as a whole, because it was not only additive, it was multiplicative.
Exactly. That's what really interested me. How could Phil Jackson show up for exactly who Michael Jordan needed and Dennis Rodman? These very, very different players with very different motivations. How can he show up and inspire and motivate them to get the best out of them when he was one person, right? And being able to kind of morph into the leader each needed, I think was a huge part of their success.
And he's a very agile coach, the way I picture him. And that also translates into the business world, where we need that kind of agility to deal with our teammates and clients in ways that help them move on in their professional journey.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me when I speak with clients that tell me this is how I manage. And if it doesn't work for everybody, that's fine. But this is how I manage. Because what they're
Mhm.
telling me is that they're okay with many of their team members not being fully engaged. And I don't know if they realize that that's what they're telling you when they say that.
That's an interesting comment about being fully engaged. What does engagement mean to you?
Engagement means to me how an employee feels about work, if the employee is excited about the work they're doing, and if they're willing to bring 100% of themselves to the job every day. I think so many of our team members become disengaged because of our leadership style and the way that we choose to communicate. And unfortunately, we might not see that they're disengaged for quite a while. Typically,
Hmm.
leaders do not realize that their team members are disengaged until they become somewhat toxic. Unfortunately, a person's usually been pretty disengaged for quite a while before they turn toxic. Leaders that can understand their engagement level of their team members, I find to be much more intentional, um, better leaders at the end of the day.
Hmm. That intentionality is so important, and I think you nailed it with your comment that we don't necessarily see the problems until they're major problems.
Well, unfortunately, I find that so many leaders, and again, this served them well to get to where they're at, but it doesn't necessarily serve them in the moment. They tend to
Hmm.
be firefighters. So they tend to focus on the fires of the business and they rush and they put those out and they get that quick dopamine hit because it feels really, really good to do something that you see immediate gratification from. But the best leaders are the ones that set aside time to suss out issues before there's even smoke, right? The best leaders have such great communication with their team that even when their team members are slightly frustrated, they hone in on that. They don't ignore that, they dig in to ensure that their team members' frustrations are dealt with before they become larger issues that lead to disengagement.
That's a really good point, and it takes it some people say that leadership is something you're born with. Obviously, you and I agree that leadership can be developed and learned and improved. And, Phil Jackson comes to mind. There are some other leaders and coaches that come to mind that they're almost psychic in the way they can find find these gaps in leadership in their teammates and colleagues.
Yeah, there's a great book. I'm sure you've read it, but The Culture Code. And the
Hmm.
author digs into different entities, sports world, corporate world, that have had long-standing success. And what are the leadership qualities that you can see through each of these be copied almost? And it really does come down to intentionality. Leaders
Hmm.
that are the best leaders are very, very intentional with how they communicate, how they manage their time, and how they prioritize how they're going to deal with their business. And I think that the intentionality is the common denominator between each.
It takes a lot of awareness and thoughtfulness to be able to do that.
Well, yeah, it was so funny. I was working with one client, and, early on, we had decided that he wanted to start having consistent meetings with his team. He wanted
Hmm.
consistent group meeting. He wanted consistent one-on-ones. He was very proud of himself for putting these on his calendar. We were off to a great start. Eventually, I started coaching some of his other team members. And lo and behold, I found out that while the meetings were on his schedule, oftentimes he would just not show up for the meetings, or he pushed them off and make the team member feel like it wasn't important to him, or they weren't important or valuable. And so, yeah, the intention is a couple folds, right? The intention to set the meeting is great, but the follow through intention also equally has to be important. If you do things half matter, you put it on the calendar, but you don't follow through or you push it off, the effects of the team are sometimes even worse than if you hadn't scheduled the meeting at all. So that thoughtfulness has to be there with how we manage our time and communicate. Otherwise, it does lead to the team members truly disengaging from the work.
That seems to be a key source of toxicity in leadership relationships sometimes.
Yes. And again, it's typically not intentional on the leader's part, because when I went back to that leader and I asked, what is going on? Oh man, I know it's just horrible. I just really don't have time in my day for all of this. Okay, well, let's take a look at how you are spending your time. And again, what I found is a pattern. So many leaders tend to hoard responsibilities that other people on their team could do, but the leader keeps it on their plate because it feels good to have something that they know they're good at. It feels good to
Hmm.
have things on their plate that they could cross off and say, that's done. It feels good to have something on their plate that they don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about and strategizing. Those are the quick wins. So when we hoard things on our calendar and we don't give them or pass along and develop our team, we tend to then have those moments of, I just don't have any time to actually lead my team. And if we focus on what could be shared and what needs to be on your plate, you tend to find a lot more time to actually meet with your team, have those conversations that are so important, and inspire and motivate.
It's one of the most demoralizing comments I can think of from a leader when they say, I don't have time or I'm too busy. And, that, I mean, that's the whole point of a calendar is to make sure that we're reminded of those crucial meetings that we need to have.
Yeah, I mean, that is the number one complaint I hear from clients, is the fact that whoever they report to does not know how to manage their time, does not know how to cut meetings off so that they can be on time for other meetings, does not know how to clear their schedule for brainstorming sessions. So much is left to email. So many conversations are left to email, and that leads to so much frustration from the employee's end.
Yeah, there's always that crutch of email to fall back on. And I mean, email is great for having a searchable knowledge base of information, but by the time those kinds of emails get sent, things may be getting worse.
Well, I think there's a lot of assumptions with emails. I think there's an assumption on the part of the leader that people will feel comfortable pushing back, will feel comfortable pointing out things that they don't agree with in an email, when that's just typically not the case, especially if you have,
Hmm.
5+ people on an email. Most people are not going to push back in front of a large audience. They don't want to disrespect the leader. So I think a lot of times leaders have assumptions built in that haven't necessarily been talked through.
Yeah, that's a good point. And um, I tend to think this is even more toxic in a remote management relationship where there isn't the opportunity to have those water cooler talks or just bump into somebody in the hallway or stick your head in the office when they've got a spare moment and sit and check in.
Yeah, I think that with the remote work specifically, you have to be a lot more intentional. I am a huge advocate for setting 10 minutes catch up session. We don't need a
Hmm.
full hour on the calendar. We can do that 10-minute because, yeah, I don't see you in the office. I'm not walking by and asking that question. But that 10 minutes face to face, how's everything going? Have any questions? Anything we need to talk through? Are you good to go? Really allows us to connect and start building some of that trust that necessarily can't be had in group meetings.
Okay. Um, I I love that 10-minute format because, it does provide those, as you say, check-ins, and it also shows a bit of humanity, a bit of caring about people. When I was a C-level executive, I would come to dread those 1 hour check-ins because it felt like there was a lot of pressure to cover a great deal of information in what turned out to be a short amount of time.
Yeah, the shorter check-ins, the moments of, um, I call it brain melding, especially when we start working together, understanding how your brain works, understanding how my brain works, being able to have that back and forth more often, I find is what builds that trust that we want at the end of the day. We don't build the trust in those, yeah, hour and a half meetings where we're hitting all these agenda points.
Are there other underdeveloped areas in leadership development or learning programs that you found?
Well, I think unfortunately, in today's day and age, communication overall needs to be developed more. I think there's a lot of assumptions around how we communicate and how we create buy-in. I just had this conversation the other day with a client of mine. We were talking about creating buy-in, and his thought of creating buy-in is I'm going to share this massive spreadsheet with people and ask for their feedback. So that's fascinating. Okay. So this massive spreadsheet is how many pages? And he looked at it and it was like 30 pages of a spreadsheet. I said, okay. And it's very pretty. It's all formatted. So you think that you're going to send this to 10 people. They're going to take the time to look through every single page of the spreadsheet, understand the whys and what you want to get out of it and your goals. And then you really think they're going to come back with feedback of changes for you. He goes, yeah, why wouldn't they? I said, well, let me ask you, if I called you up and I said, hey, have you got like 15 minutes for me to walk you through this, my ideas, why I built this, what my goals are for it. I could point out some things that I'm really proud about it. And I'm going to ask you to poke as many holes as possible, just us one-on-one, and give me all your dirty feedback on it. Anything that you think should be changed or anything I'm not thinking about. Which avenue do you think I'm going to get the most feedback on? He goes, well, your way, obviously. I'm like, yeah,
Right.
exactly. So what do you want at the end of the day? If you truly want feedback, you truly want to create buy-in, then you do that at the front. You don't give them the pretty document and hope and pray that they have the gumption to start poking out things. Because truly, if somebody's going to give me a document that looks like they've spent 40 hours on it, I'm probably not going to point out the tiny little things I think need to be fixed. Because they spent 40 hours on it. It looks like they put so much time and effort into it. But if I ask you to weigh in when I start working on something, you're going to give me the nitty gritty. You're going to feel like now it's collaborative. We built it together. This isn't Aleta's document. It's our document. So at the end of
Mhm.
the day, you're probably going to advocate for it a little bit more than if I went solo and just asked for your feedback at the end of the day.
And that brings to mind the difference between, these big honking spreadsheets, as I call them, and dashboards. Dashboards are very deliberately designed so that they're scannable. We can drill down into them, where a 30-page Excel document is really the data behind the dashboard. And at the end of the day, we rely more on this glanceable information than diving in deep into data.
100%. But again, it's how we communicate it, right? We're talking
Mhm.
about how do we communicate these ideas. So if I'm looking at the area that I think needs to be invested in the most is communication development. Because the difference between feedback and buy-in is night and day. And the goals for each are very, very different. And how it inspires people and motivates people or gets people to jump on board and advocate for your way is it's very different than just getting somebody's feedback. So developing out some of these communication skills, I think is really, really necessary if we want sustainable growth and ability to meet our goals. I think there's a lot of basic communication skills that we believe are common sense in today's world that are not. I believe that when I was coming up, I even think about book reports. When I was
Hmm.
doing a book report when I was younger, I think about the fact that I had to go to the library and I had to talk to the librarian. I had to go to the card catalog. There was like 30 different steps I had to take to make a book report. And often, many of those steps included interacting with individuals that I did not know. Today's teenager, and I know this from my son, doing a book report, he just asks Siri. Siri spits out all these facts and he does his book report. There's very few steps he has to go through to do this. There's very few interaction points he has to have. And so at the end of the day, he is missing out on confidence building that comes from this and the learning that comes from going through all those steps and interacting. Today's emerging leader has had a lot less practice in some of these skill sets that you and I had tons of practice on back before social media and computers dominated our world.
And that's an important leadership capability that we sometimes overlook, that ability to navigate different contacts and work with people who we've just met in order to gather the information and insights that we need. Um, are there other leadership capabilities that your clients are trying to build, and how does coaching and learning and development play into that?
Yeah, another big one is a culture of feedback. So, how to give feedback, how to get to the root cause of an issue in order to problem solve the root cause rather than just focus on the surface issue. These are two skills that I find to be super important in best practices for leaders. But these are typically not ones that a lot of companies focus on developing with their current leaders and their next generation of leaders coming up. These two
Hmm.
abilities, being able to give feedback in an inspirational and motivational way, being able to identify root causes of issues to deal with those root causes, these are two pivotal skills that I believe every great leader has to be able to have. But so many of our emerging leaders haven't been developed in either of these areas. And then we start to see the effects on our team.
And and that brings to mind something I learned ages ago, and it's not just the content or the feedback, it's the way it's presented.
Yeah.
Eh,
I mean, it's mostly about how it's presented, right? Maya Angelou has
mhm.
this great quote: people don't remember what you said, people don't remember what you did, people remember how you make them feel. And it truly does come down to that. My intentions, my energy that I bring to giving feedback definitely changes the way in which I give you feedback and will change the way how you feel about me during that moment. And that's a lot of what I start working with my clients on. When clients start working with me for executive coaching, the first thing we talk about, or one of the first things we talk about, is what is your intention in communication? Another way to think about this is how do you want people to feel during or after a conversation with you? And I like to ask them to challenge that in different scenarios. So throughout my CHRO time, I could be giving feedback in one moment, I could be hiring somebody in another moment, and I could be terminating somebody in another moment. Regardless of the end goal of any of those conversations, my intention was to ensure that my conversation partner felt seen, heard, and appreciated. The more I rooted myself in that intention prior to any of those conversations, the better the conversation went. If I happened to forget to root myself in that and I took my energy from one interaction to the next, I could see the effects on the conversation. I can see how my conversation partner responded. It was never better than if I was rooted in those intentions. I think for leaders, the more that they can be a little bit more reflective and intentional with their energy going into these conversations, they would find themselves having better outcomes.
And how much does emotional intelligence play into this?
It's huge. And that's a lot of the work that we do in executive coaching, because making sure that you are as aware as you can be personally about how you show up, about your healthy and unhealthy behavior, is only going to benefit the team that you are working with. And that will also give you a greater understanding of how others are showing up and allows you, again, to get to more of those root causes rather than dealing with those assumptions.
That- That's a great observation. And, one of the common threads that we've had in our conversation today is not only identifying the root causes, but, the ability of a leader to compartmentalize
Mm.
so that they're better able to engage in the moment rather than having the previous moments overwhelm them.
Yeah, if you're not intentional, what I find is that you tend to be the Jekyll and Hyde leader. You tend
Hmm.
to be the leader that is very reactive and is very triggered by your own emotion. So that could look like, everything's going well. And you come in as a leader that's like, everybody's great and I trust you and you run with it. Things might not be going well, whether in business or personally, and you could come up with it's my way or the highway. Don't question me. This is how we're doing things. That Jekyll and Hyde leader causes a ton of anxiety for their team because a team member doesn't know who's showing up in any given day. And then
Hmm.
there's a lot of energy that goes into managing that leader from the employee's perspective. If they're in a good mood, I'll talk to them about this. If they're in a bad mood, I'll talk to them about this. If they're in a good mood, I'll try to get this passed through. If they're in a bad mood, I'll have to do this song and dance. And we typically do not want our team to spend a ton of effort, time, and energy managing us because of our own emotional upheaval. So the
Hmm.
best leaders are very mindful of their own emotional state and take great pains to manage that so it doesn't affect their team.
And one of the earliest questions I had in dealing with leaders in my career was, how do you do this? And as I moved up the evolutionary ladder in my leadership journey, it turned into a why question. Why do you do this? Which I think we've been discussing very effectively.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me when I meet with leaders and they don't ask any why questions. They say a lot
Hmm.
of statements or any questions at all. They say a lot of statements. And I find that the best leaders and the leaders that people want to work for the most are the ones that are really, really great at getting curious, are really great at asking all the why questions before they say any statements.
That that's a great point. Um, what do you think the future of learning looks like, especially with leadership development, since we've been touching on this emerging class of leaders, the millennials and Generation Alpha who are coming up the ranks?
Well, I think that there's going to have to be more investment and resources dedicated to the development of these individuals. I think that you're starting to see some companies understand that. AI is amazing. AI and artificial intelligence can take a lot of the minutia off of the plate. But what we need from the next emerging group of leaders is these soft skills that
Hmm.
can be developed, but it has to be given the resources to develop. So many companies, unfortunately, focus on training and do not put the resources to develop it. And I find that we're going to meet a moment as soon as the older generation does retire, we're going to see a lot of voids that we're going to need to fill. And these emerging leaders aren't necessarily ready to fill those voids yet. So I believe that we're going to see a lot more focus on developing these soft skills over the next 5 years because it's just needed for all of these companies and the voice that they're going to have.
It's almost like we're having to catch up from not only the effects of the pandemic, but just I call it the self-service learning phenomenon with younger generations of managers and employees. They're used to be they're used to searching for information on their own, and it's very specific searches that happen in the flow of work. Um, Training up until the last few years is always focused on preparing people in this big block of time and hoping that they remember these nuggets of information in the flow of work. And that always struck me as aspirational and not quite fully operational.
Well, again, I just don't think the resources have been dedicated to that. Every L&D team that I've ever been on or consulted with, the focus of the budget goes to training, onboarding, and just systems
Mhm.
training or daily process training. But the companies that we've seen do really, really well and have sustainable success are the ones that understand the investment in the soft skills is what's going to separate you.
Excellent. I often think of soft skills as power skills because people associate that word soft with ineffective or
Mhm.
kind of passive. And, power skills imply action and intentionality, which, it's something that all managers and leaders need, but I think as we've identified, it's especially chronic in the younger millennial and Gen Alpha folks who again are coming up the ranks and are learning their way, but they've had much different journeys their than executives had, and in some cases than we've had.
Yeah. I think it was Simon Sinek who also started calling it human skills. And I love that human or power skills. Cause I do think it's true that yeah, soft skills get a bad rap because people just, oh, that's the soft side. No, it's really how do we relate as humans to each other? How do I motivate and inspire my team to get the best out of them and to ensure that they show up as the happiest version of themselves on a consistent basis? And I think those human power skills are really needed for this next generation.
And I love that term that you have, the human skills, because one of the things that's always troubled me about management throughout my entire career, which has been devoted to adult education and leadership in particular, is that we don't pay enough attention to the human side.
This is so true. It's so funny. I share a mortifying story with a lot of people. When I was first promoted to general manager of a restaurant, I remember I had a very authoritative perspective, and it was my way or the highway. And I was very
Mhm.
young. I think I was like 21. I was a female in a very male dominated industry. So I had my backup. And I remember I had a kitchen that was not okay taking directions from me. And so I one morning said, it's my way or the highway. If you don't like, get out. My entire kitchen walked out on me. And it was such an amazing lesson for me that I am so grateful for that happened early in my career because I realized very, very quickly I could not do this on my own. I needed a team of people that wanted to work with me if I was going to be successful. I cleaned it up. I went after them. I apologized. I ate crow for a while. I brought them all back. But man, was it amazing for me to learn in that moment that it really is about my team. And if my team's not happy, my team's not willing to take directions from me and work with me, then I am going to fail point blank. And I think I wish that more leaders had that experience early in their career because I think it made a profound mark on me. And I think a lot of people need to realize that, and that would be key for them to understand how to be a great leader.
And happy teams is a term that doesn't get thrown around a lot. We always focus on productive teams or teams that work well together, and we just sort of dance around the happiness and joy that people want from work. That people don't want to just show up for a paycheck or for something to do during the day. They want something more out of it, both emotionally and professionally.
Well, happy teams are more productive teams. Happy teams are better critical thinking teams. Happy teams are looking for how can I improve everything because I want everything to be better. Disengaged teams are the ones that are going to keep their head down. And yeah, I see that thing on fire, but it's not my problem. And I'm going to ignore it until somebody makes it my problem. Disengaged, unhappy teams are the ones that are not bringing their full self to work, and therefore they're not as productive. I think it all goes together. We've seen the data, but the happier the team is, the more productive they are, the better they are at critical thinking, and the better they will come together to help each other, which is what's needed to have sustainable success.
And that sustainability is so important because we can push people to be more productive in the hour or the day. But, it's just like swimming or running. We're building the capability to sustain that performance not only during the event, but over time, so that we can not only get better at it, we can be happier with doing it. There's nothing more miserable than going through a workout or a race and saying, "Ooh, I'm done," and that's it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we see from the statistics that the majority of our workforce at this point in time is disengaged. I mean, quiet
Hmm.
quitting is a term that is quite useful today because most employees have quiet quit. They are disengaged. They are showing up to work, they're collecting the paycheck, but they don't want to be there. And I find that, yeah, the companies that stand out are the ones that do a great job ensuring that their team is developed, have the resources that they need, but also feel that support from leadership.
And, we've talked about different facets of getting support from leadership in our conversation today. Are there any pieces in corporate learning that if you could redo them from scratch, that you would do differently?
Yeah, I think when I look at different L&D departments and the assets that they have, what I see to be missing that I would build in is a lot more engagement surveys and assessments where we're actually getting real-time feedback. I find that the companies that do have these built in, whether it's at the end of a learning module, give us feedback on this learning module, or there's routine assessments and engagement assessments that the team is taking, that is when you see leadership reacting in the moment and giving their team what they need. I find that the organizations that have open door policies are really the ones that are lacking and behind because they're the ones that are assuming their team will bring to them any issues that they have. The more that we can build in time to collect that feedback, to assess how our team is doing in the moment, that is going to lead to the happier team, the fully engaged team, and L&D departments giving the people what they need and what they want to be supported and do their job to the best of their ability.
And it's always interesting, um, with hospitality management. I've long been fascinated about that dichotomy between the front of the house and the back of the house, and what happens when the front of the house is trying to paper over problems or conflicts in the back of the house.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been in hospitality since I was like 13. I've worked for a couple organizations that were very, very intentional about not calling it the back of house and the front of house, not
Hmm.
having that divide, having a one team approach. I have seen those organizations have way higher engagement than the
Hmm.
organizations that have that line. It is something that the hospitality industry is constantly having to take a look at because that divide is a divide in real time in their culture. And so I think it's going to be an ongoing problem for those companies that choose to not have more of a cohesive team.
And we see this in businesses too. There's the back office, and then there's everything else. And one thing I look at when I go into an organization for an engagement is how how defined is that dichotomy, or the silos, if you will.
Yeah. And again, it's intention, right? Because just the verbiage that we put to it says a lot. And it does then give the context for everybody else as to how they are to interact and what the reasonable behavior is. How we describe things, what we name things, and then how we throw those terms around definitely tells people how you want them to react to those departments. A lot of the silos are created not because they were intentionally set forth, but just because they were named certain things. And so the assumptions that go along with that have carried on.
Excellent point. Are there any closing thoughts that you have on our conversation today?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the more resources, focus, and concentration over these power or human skills, the soft skills that we've been talking about, the more that we focus on those, we see the better the business does in the long run. So I would just really challenge leaders and individuals out there to ask themselves, do they have the support they need? Have they given themselves the support that they really need to thrive in the leadership role? And I would challenge those that are emerging leaders to focus on the personal awareness, their emotional awareness, and building out some of these skill sets that they will need to be really successful leaders.
That's great. If any of our listeners or viewers wanted to reach out to you for more information, where would they go?
Yeah, they can check me out on my website. That's upliftingleadership.com. And I would love to extend to all of your listeners a free 45-minute strategy session. If they want to email me at Aleta, Aleta, at upliftlead.com, I would be happy to send them my calendar. We can jump on a Zoom call for a 45-minute strategy session, talk through your challenges, see what coaching can do for you or any of my other programs that might be helpful.
Excellent. I encourage our listeners and viewers to go ahead and contact you because I'm sure many people in our audience today have um, found some resonance in what we've talked about and said, wait a moment, I'm starting to look at things a little bit differently, but I need to go farther down this path.
I hope so. I find that the clients that I've worked with over the years, the impact that coaching has had on their careers has been really exceptional. A lot of my clients has jumped 2 or 3 positions in their career since we started working together. So just carving out time to reflect and be really thoughtful and intentional on their leadership skills that has really done them a lot of service to their career.
Fantastic. Well, Alita, I've had a great conversation with you today. And again, I hope our viewers and listeners will share their thoughts with us and contact you for more information. Um, Folks, if you want to contact me with your thoughts, you can go to n3ed.com and find my contact information there. And Alita, once again, thank you for joining us today. And I'll look forward to seeing our viewers and hearing from our listeners on the next step in the perfect route.
Thank you so much, Bill, for having me. I loved this conversation and can't wait to talk to some of your viewers in the future.
Excellent. Take care, everybody.